All right, welcome everyone to the first YP virtual event of 2020. This is crazy times that we're in, but we're so glad that you can join us. I am William Moses. I am the VP of Collegiate Relations in the YP group at the AMA Cincinnati. We have a few board members here on the event as well. So if you'd like to learn more about the AMA, getting involved, learning about some of the benefits, feel free to reach out to myself or anyone else that is a part of the board. That'd be great. We'd love to talk to you. But I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you're not here to listen to me talk. You're here to get some great knowledge from our two distinguished guests, Danielle and Emmy. So I will turn it over to them. Danielle, you should be able to share your screen. If you're not, just let me know.
Awesome. I think Emmy's actually going to share her screen, so I'll let her take over.
Perfect. All right. And if you are on, feel free to share your video if you feel comfortable doing so. It helps to kind of bring together a sense of community and togetherness here as we all navigate these virtual times. But completely up to you guys.
Hey, William, it says that the host disabled participant screen sharing when I click share screen.
Let's see.
I don't know if that is user error or not.
Let me see if I can give you that permission.
Well, I think you have to make her a co-host or make her the host.
Yeah, let's try now. See if you can share your screen now.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So tip number one in a digital world is be okay to deal with technology issues. So thank you everyone for taking the time this evening. So we'll just do some quick intros. I am Emmy Owens. I am part of the HR and talent team at 8451. For those who may not be familiar, 8451, we are a data science and customer experience company wholly owned by Kroger. We are based here in Cincinnati and then have offices in Chicago, New York, Portland, etc.
Awesome. And I'm Danielle Brindisi. I work in human resources at Empower in our OTR headquarters. We also have an office in Chicago. We're a creative media agency with clients ranging both locally and nationally. And if anyone is open to talking about opportunities, I posted my LinkedIn profile here, so feel free to reach out to me after.
Great, thanks. So as you guys saw on the page when you registered, a little bit about what we're hoping to cover this evening. Really just three main topics. We're going to start with resume, some best practices, tips and tricks to help you get your resume noticed. We'll then talk a little bit about networking, how to get connected. We'll talk about social profiles, what networking looks like now that we're all virtual. And then last but not least, we will dive into interviewing, some general interviewing tips, and then again, what to consider and think about now that video interviewing and virtual interviewing is all that companies are doing for the most part. So to get started, like I said, we'll just start talking a little bit about resume. So first of all, when it comes to your resume, it should be a piece that you're proud of, right? A snapshot of who you are and how you want to be seen in the professional world. So a couple areas to focus on when you're thinking about your resume. First is format. So you can see on the screen, we put two different resumes. Both are sample, not real. But when you think about the format, it should be organized, neat, easy to read. Again, the focus is on the content. It shouldn't be on the design. It shouldn't be on the font, etc. Another part around format for a resume is, that it should really be one page. At this point, as many of you are young professionals, it's likely you've had an internship, some in-school experience, first job, maybe second job. As you grow in your career, your resume certainly can stretch beyond one page, but at this point, I would recommend that one page should suffice. Contact info. So your contact info should always be at the top of the page with your primary email and phone number. Good thing to remember, these should always be professional. So no goofy email handles. I don't think ringback tones are a thing anymore, but think about your voicemail. It should be sort of professional greeting. Second point around contact information, it is appropriate to include a link to your online profile or portfolio. So if you're a designer, you have your own website, include a link. Developer, you have a GitHub profile, include that link. Last but not least, it's always good to just include your LinkedIn profile. Objective or summary. So this is a question that we actually get quite a lot. Is an objective, is a summary, is it necessary? And honestly, a vague or poorly written summary or objective can do more harm than good. So I would say an objective or a summary is optional, but if you do decide to include one, it should be specific to the industry and the position that you're applying for. Certainly is appropriate to edit your objective, your summary, depending on the role, depending on the company. Next topic around, or next section for a resume will be around education. So outside of your university degree, sometimes you want to include your GPA. You can also include any academic awards or honors. So if you were on the dean's list all 4 years, or you were some sort of other academic achievement, it's appropriate to include that. It can showcase that, your achievement. It can also showcase your leadership experience. You can include relevant coursework if it pertains to the role. So not super interested that you took, Marketing 101, while that's helpful. But if you are applying for a data scientist role and you've taken coursework in R or Python, that's certainly relevant to include and helps to give, again, that snapshot into your total experience. And then around experience. So this should be the most substantial piece of your resume. Think of experience, it should be in reverse chronological order. So what you're doing today should be at the top. And it's really important as you're writing out your experience that you use action words and quantify information and results if possible. We'll talk a little bit about this again in the next slide, but it's always helpful to think of the so what. So it's not just what you did, but so what? What was the action? What was the result? What was the impact? And then last but not least, leadership activities and skills and interest. So when it comes to leadership activities and services, again, you want to think about quality over quantity. So if you were the president of a sorority or fraternity or led a community service organization, that certainly makes sense to include, but don't necessarily have to include if you spent a quarter on the rec baseball league, for example. And then around skills and interests, so it's good to include computer skills, technical languages, even maybe identify common interests. But again, think about the role that you're applying. It's not necessarily important to say that you're proficient in Microsoft Office. It's 2020, probably take for granted that most people are proficient in Microsoft Office. But if you have particular competency in R, Python, SQL, that's certainly important to add. If you are a 4-time marathon finisher, adding those sort of common interests certainly makes sense to add to your resume, because again, it helps to show your professional profile and who you are as an individual. So some helpful tips, proofread.
Hey, Amy, real quick.
Oh,
Could you possibly zoom in a little bit more for your screen? I think we see it in the like the display setting, maybe.
oh, sure. I apologize. 1 minute.
Yeah, no worries.
Let me reshare and then see if I can flip it for you. Let me flip.
Perfect.
Is that better?
It was, but then it went back.
Oh, there we go.
There
Better?
we go. Yep, perfect. Thank you.
So start at the top, say proofread, proofread, proofread. So we cannot say it enough. Having typos in your resume, it goes to attention to detail. And it's really easy to overlook, especially if you've read over your resume 10 different times. So it's always good to maybe ask a friend to read your resume. That helps can flag any errors. You can print your resume, even if you're submitting it electronically. It helps for proofreading. Again, as you're going through to proofread, think about spelling, think about grammar, think about using proper tense. Talked about it a little bit before, but quantifying your experience is really important as you're going through your resume. Not only does it help to speak to your achievement and impact, but it also shows that you're focused on actions and outcomes. So quantifying, using leadership language, and then again, backing it up with results. So when we talk about leadership language, strong action-oriented words like developed, created, implemented. You don't want to overstate or say anything that's untrue, but also don't be afraid to claim it if it is. So for example, it's good to say that I implemented a social media plan, but it's even better, stronger to say that I implemented a social media plan that resulted in an increase of over 10,000 followers over a 3-month period. So again, using that strong leadership language and then backing that up with results and quantifying. And then last but not least, don't be shy. You don't want to brag either. Again, don't over exaggerate, but your resume is not the place to downplay your genuine accomplishments. Employers want to know what you're capable of. We want to know what motivates you. We want to know where your interests lie. So again, personal accomplishments can be as useful as professional in telling your story. So any achievement, any success area that's appropriate. Again, if you're a 3-time marathon finisher, former president of a fraternity or sorority, or you volunteer mentor with project literacy, all of that is relevant and good to include. And then the last piece that we'll touch on around resume is just common mistakes. So talked about it a few times now, typos, absolutely. Again, proofread, mass applying. So it's really important before you apply to a job, before you submit your resume, read through the job description, read through the qualifications, the experience, research the company. It's not necessarily a good vision of the view for the organization if you're applying to anything and everything. Really want to be specific and pointed to where you want to be considered and where you feel like you could really be a strong fit. Using personal pronouns, I, me, my. Again, fancy formatting. When it comes to your resume, really focusing on the content, the meat of that resume, not necessarily the design, the pictures. Stretching the truth we've talked about. Acronyms and jargon. So we'll often see that folks will put in acronyms or jargon that are really specific to your company or proprietary platforms. So be cognizant that the folks that are reviewing your resume may not always be familiar with that. So if you are going to use an acronym, putting in parentheses, sort of spelling it out at least once, helps to really make that, make your experience shine through. Mentioning salary and requirements. So not really something to include in your resume. When it's appropriate, a company or an employer will ask about your salary expectations for a new opportunity. Will ask for references. A lot of time that may be part of the application process. but certainly not anything that's necessarily needed on a resume. And then last but not least, adding unnecessary fluff. Again, this should be your professional profile. So put what's relevant, put what you've really, the experience you've had, impact that you've made. Don't feel the need to add unnecessary filler or fluff.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the mass applying one is a pet peeve of mine when I get individuals who maybe have 2 years of experience but are applying to a job that says 6+ years. It just kind of sends a red flag for me that this is not an application that they put a lot of thought behind, or that they're just trying to, kind of throw as many darts on the wall as they can. We didn't get any questions in here. I don't know if anyone wants to raise their hand or shoot in a question. We can quickly cover that before we move on to networking.
I have a question.
Of course.
So, it wasn't mentioned, but I heard that, I've heard people talk about using, keywords that are mentioned in a job listing because it goes through some sort of, database. Do you know anything about that? Or, does that speak to anything? Because it sounds I don't know, not that I didn't believe it, but I was that sounds I don't know, not the most important thing, but I could be wrong.
Sure. When it comes to your resume, so I can obviously speak to my experience in our company.
Yeah.
It's not that your resume comes in a sort of, there's a keyword review that shoots you to the top or anything like that. Where keywords come into play is, in many cases, as a recruiter, I have the opportunity to search our database, and I will do that by keyword. So I can search anyone that's applied in the history of a certain period of time. If you applied to something last year, I can search for your resume today, and I would do that by keywords.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
The other part, and Danielle will talk about it here a little bit in social profiles, but where keywords come into play is around LinkedIn and building out your profile there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I feel like that whole word bubble idea that came up a long time ago was some sort of rumor from people who are applying to large companies like Google and Facebook that may have a larger system that filters through resumes looking for those. But I think for the most part, companies don't have any sort of filtering system that allows those keywords to be pulled out. But I do think it's helpful to have those in maybe your supporting documents, or when you bring it to an interview, point those things out, because it shows you've put your research into the job description. Awesome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about applying for multiple positions, and the concern I have is, in my experience, it's hard to understand the organizational structure and where you fit within it, what level you should come in at. And often I'll see two positions, one subordinate to the other, but you don't really know where you are in that organization, especially if your history is with large company and you're going small company, or the other way around. It's kind of hard to know. So I always struggle with, does it make more sense to put yourself in for one, hope you get it so that you can have your interviewer help assess where you'd best fit? How should I handle that?
So in my experience, I will say, Deb, if when we talk about mass applying, first I'll say it's not necessarily one or two positions. Mass applying is if I see someone that's applied to 5, 6 positions. And I do agree, it's hard to know, particularly title. And the same is true on our end as we're looking at candidates. It's hard to know necessarily your purview and scope of responsibility by title, because it does fluctuate by company. Typically, if 2 positions are that similar in that it's sort of a role and then it's subordinate, I think applying to one of them is sufficient, because on our end, as the recruiter and even the hiring manager is typically the same person, the same team. So as we talk to you, talk about your experience level, your scope of responsibility, we'll be able to identify which level is appropriate. And even if you didn't apply to the one that is, we'll be able to make that decision internally in conjunction with you and what you want to do.
Okay, so the recruiters do talk to each other even if the individual roles are not within the same department?
In
You
our
okay?
organization, yes. Now, a Google, an Amazon, I can't speak to, but for most organizations in Cincinnati, where, to be honest, your recruiting teams are not of that size, we do talk to each other. We do share candidates. If one of my coworkers talks to a candidate that they feel is a good fit for an area of the business that I support, we certainly share in that fashion.
Thank you.
Same with us as well. We're small enough where we're able to know exactly what positions are posted and rotate them throughout accordingly.
Okay, it's good to know.
Any other questions?
I have a question. For your resume, what's the best way to handle a long-term layoff from no jobs, especially now with the pandemic, and maybe if people are going to struggle after this pandemic to even get employment? We don't know if there's going to be a recession or anything like that. So what's the best way to handle maybe a loss of job before the pandemic combined with the pandemic, but then also now that there is a pandemic and we don't know what the future is going to be with that?
Yeah, good question, Brandon. I mean, honestly, I've seen folks that, at the end of their role say, in italics or whatever it is, role downsized due to COVID-19 or just role eliminated. So sort of putting it out there to the forefront of why that position ended. I do think that it can also be helpful is if you are doing freelance assignments while searching for a role, or if you are taking the time to do some additional professional development courses. I think it's helpful to know, that your role was impacted for whatever reason, but how are you keeping your skills and experience sharp? How are you growing your skills during this time as well?
Okay, that makes sense. And then also, if someone would say, like hypothetically, have a medical condition where they were, out of work, how would you represent that on a resume for someone like that?
I wouldn't, to be honest. In my, that's sort of personal health information. It's not necessarily appropriate for me to know as a recruiter for our our company to know as considering employment. So I wouldn't necessarily put that on a resume. I think it's okay to say that your role ended, but I don't know that you need to go much further than that.
Okay. Makes sense.
I say this a lot. I know I can get in trouble with other recruiters for saying this. I'm not a huge cover letter fan. Quite frankly, cover letters are very time consuming. So I often breeze over them, and I apologize to anyone who's submitted one. But I do think that there are certain instances where I will review a resume, and if something stands out, for example, a job, a significant time in between two jobs, I will sometimes go check the resume or the cover letter to see if there's anything indicated in there. So that's another space where you could put impacted by COVID. You could put that in the cover letter if you don't feel like you can fit it into the resume.
Sure. Thanks.
All right. If anyone else has any other questions, we can cover them quickly or put them in the chat and touch base with them at the end.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Should resume be only one page?
So it really does depend on your level of experience. So if you are a young professional, right, you have some school, you have some internship, maybe a job, one, maybe two professional jobs, then yes, best practice would be to keep your resume to one page. As you grow on in your career, no, the one page rule no longer exists. But as a young professional, I would recommend that yes, one page would be appropriate.
So then let's say you're applying to like a fellowship program, and the fellowship program consists of like multiple roles, HR, marketing. So then how can you tailor your resume? It's only one page resume. Let's say the fellowship program.
I'm not 100% certain I follow. When you say a fellowship opportunity that includes HR, marketing, would it be like?
Yeah, there's different opportunity. Like it's like a fellowship program, but like it's different opportunity. Like you join in like a cohort of fellow. Like it's not for like a specific role. So how can you tailor your resume? That's what I mean.
In that case, it may be appropriate to extend beyond if it's sort of something particular for a fellowship, or there may be other requirements in terms of portfolio of experience or other things that you need to submit. But I would say for a traditional sort of, I'm applying for, you know, a job, not outside of fellowship or other types of opportunities, that one page would be relevant. But for fellowship and depending on the needs of the program, you need to use your best judgment on if it makes sense to make it longer.
Right.
Another question we came through, is there a preferred format for submitting a resume, PDF or doc?
I always lean towards PDF. Either is fine, you know, I think, but PDF really helps to keep your format consistent. It ensures that it comes into our system looking appropriately, the format's appropriate. Every applicant tracking system, that's sort of our recruiting system, is a little bit different. So I would typically lean towards PDF. Danielle, I'm not sure your thoughts there as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And if there's something that's happening in the application process that's making you question, I would always read the directions on what it says. And when in doubt, maybe upload a copy of both, a PDF and a Word document. Specifically, we recently interviewed for a bunch of copywriter positions. In the job description, we asked for all portfolios to be included. And I would say probably 60% of the applicants did not include a link to their profile in the application process. And that was an automatic red flag for us. So I would just read the directions as best you can. And when in doubt, you could put both copies. Okay, so for sake of time, we'll keep moving forward. And if more questions come up, we'll answer them at the end in general if they do not get covered in the other content. So I'm going to quickly cover how you can utilize networking to help in your job hunt efforts. I would say probably more than likely a large number of you have received an interview or a phone screen based on a connection that you've had in the organization. And as you continue to grow in your career, it's vital for you to utilize your network in order to continue to grow. So the first and easiest way you can do that is through your social profiles. The first social profile we're going to talk about is LinkedIn. I highly recommend building out your profile with all of your relevant experience and treating it like your online living resume. The more you put into your profile, the better the odds recruiters are going to be able to find you. And Emmy touched on that earlier. This is where we're looking for you to utilize those keywords and skills. Think about it, if any of you work in the advertising agency and do keyword builds, build your social profile like this. And we're actually giving you a sneak peek over here. If you look on the right side of this presentation, this is what a recruiter searches in LinkedIn. There are a bunch of other options at the end, but in the screen grab, you can see I can search by job title, location, keywords. So for example, when I'm looking for a search specialist, I might type in programmatic, or I might type in SEO. I can also click and filter by who's open to new opportunities. So I'm not sure how many of you have seen this feature, but in your settings and on your account, you can select open to new opportunities. And I posted another example on this profile, or on this page right here. It includes the job title, location, and type of employment that you're interested in. I would recommend building this out as completely as possible, because this is another way that you show up in recruiter searches. And I often, when I'm doing a search, filter for this first, because that's who I think is most likely to respond to my emails as a recruiter. So keep that up to date. And I will say, just because I know some people get nervous about this, LinkedIn commits to not sharing your open to opportunities with anyone in your current organization. So if you post that on there, no one who works in your organization can see that. And another little just helpful hint I would put up there is, when you are editing your profile to build it out like we recommend, there is a feature where you can say notify your network, and you can turn that off. Just as a heads up, it's kind of a red flag when an accountant who hasn't been on LinkedIn in 6 months, who works for me, suddenly goes on there and revamps their entire LinkedIn. So sometimes when you are trying to be discreet, it's nice to just turn off that feature of notifying your network. So outside of building out your profile, making sure you have a great profile picture that's appropriate, you have all of your job experience, leadership experience, I recommend asking for LinkedIn recommendations. So when I got on here today, I saw Keith. I've worked with Keith in the University of Cincinnati before, And if, you know, I saw a recommendation from him for a college kid who's coming out of school, I would take that as a high note and really look at that student because I know and have a connection with Keith. So whether it's advisors, peers, former managers, reach out to them, ask them for a LinkedIn recommendation, and maybe even indicate what you're looking for in that recommendation. For example, would you mind writing a recommendation about my experience on this project or my experience in, you know, SEO? You can also utilize LinkedIn for industry groups. So there's a bunch of groups on LinkedIn that post jobs, post thought leadership that you can make connections with, ask for mentors on. Utilize those groups in your job search. And then connect with people. For example, we all saw at the beginning of this presentation, we asked for everyone's LinkedIn pages. This is a great way to shoot a message after and keep the connection going. When it comes to other social profiles, obviously we all know, keep it clean and professional. I always recommend doing the Google test. So if your online footprint is a problem, outside of trying to remove those items, I recommend using LinkedIn as a solution. So LinkedIn does rank high in search results. If your profile is fully built out and you're adding thought leadership, that's going to continue to rise higher than maybe a tweet that you wrote freshman year in college that's showing up. So do that Google test, try to remove any content that you don't want seen, and then continue to build thought leadership. You know, your portfolio, if you're a designer, should be showing up on your Google search. Building out those areas is good. And then as far as Facebook, Instagram, whatever other social profile you're on, again, join relevant groups. So on Facebook, there's a Cincinnati Marketing Network. I'm on that. I'll sometimes post positions that we have open, or I'll look through people who are members on that page. I'm sure AMA has a page, and there are a bunch of other professional pages on there that you can connect with. The only thing I will say is if you haven't cleaned up your social profile and you're not going to make the efforts or the next steps to do that, I would not join those pages because that is the first impression that the company is going to have of you, and you want to make it the best impression. And then I also recommend following companies on their social media pages. Follow hashtags. So one on LinkedIn is hashtag job search. Follow any relevant information that you can gather, and utilize that information in your interview process, which we're going to get to soon. But you know, maybe if you've seen a recent social media post or you saw something that the company was doing, bringing that up in the interview shows that you've done your research and you're keeping up with the company. So on the next slide, talking about building your network through connections. Obviously, there are YP groups and professional groups that you can be a part of. I think these are huge when it comes to networking. Join these groups like this group that we're in here today. And you'll get to know people who are in the industry. And then what ultimately happens is if you continue to, what I would say, like fertilize those relationships, you can use those connections when you're applying to positions. So, you know, connect with people after you meet with them on this event via LinkedIn, ask them to go get coffee in a month with you, you know, put yourself in situations where you can invite them to the next networking event. And then say you're interested in a job at their company, reach out to them and ask if they'll give you interview advice, if they wouldn't mind sending a note to the hiring manager, or if there's any additional information they can provide about the role. I will tell you, if I get a referral from anyone at Empower, a personal referral, I will always talk to that individual. Now, some companies don't have the bandwidth to do that, but I will tell you, most systems have a way to point out when they're a referral, so it kind of flags them so you can keep an eye on it. It's a great way to make a connection to an organization. I mentioned this earlier, campus resources. Connecting with professors and advisors is a huge plus or good connection to organizations. Professors can write recommendations for you. They can reach out to company connections they have, and the same thing with advisors. And then I know it's not fun, but I always recommend participating in any free resume reviews, mock interviews, or challenges that you can. These are often sponsored or backed by local employers. So for example, I go to resume reviews and mock interviews. 8451 hosts a huge challenge at the University of Cincinnati. And so this is a great way for you to get to know the employers. And then also just great practice skills. Interviewing is not fun. It's not easy. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. And then we quickly touched on this in the question section, but participating in conferences and events in your industry can help. And right now there are a lot of virtual events. So I wanted to make this plug. You should look on Eventbrite, or, you guys are all already clearly attending events like this, but Ad Age has free events. Google offered a free seminar for Google Analytics. Take advantage of all of these, and this is where you can show some of the things you've been doing when it comes to, keeping up with industry trends or participating in thought leadership. All right. And before we move on, if anyone has any questions, feel free to send those over.
I have a question. So on your slide for social profiles, there's you have mentioned industries in the custom filters. So I tried to do this on my profile, and it asked so I've selected marketing, sales, and advertising. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, I'm not particularly interested in a kind of industry. I'm looking for more of marketing analyst roles, because I feel like I don't have that much experience to that I'm inclined towards an industry. I'm okay with any industry. I'm more focused on the role. So what do you think I should choose over there?
So I think if you can't choose multiple, which I know some of these allow you to choose multiple locations.
No, it only allows one.
Okay, then I would just leave it blank for now if you're not
okay.
a specific industry.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we'll move on and talk about interviewing again. If any other questions come up, certainly add them to the chat, and we have time for Q&A at the end. So I'll start just by talking about some helpful tips around interviewing in general. Some of this may be sort of second nature and already known, but again, as Danielle and I were coming together, these are things that we encounter often, or questions that we get, so thought it would be helpful to share with the group. First and foremost, wear professional attire. That is true in the virtual world as well. If you want to wear yoga pants on the bottom and, nice button up top, that's fine. But, many organizations are casual dress. I know at 8451, we are casual. It's certainly common to see folks in jeans and hoodies. But if you're interviewing, I would still say wear professional attire. Not necessarily a full suit, but still bringing that professional presence. If you are ever unsure what is appropriate interview attire, just ask the recruiter, ask the HR representative. We're always helpful, always happy to help you prepare to the best of your ability. To build on that is around preparing in advance. So this is not the time to sort of go in and wing it. You have a breadth of information at your fingertips with the internet, so use it. Research the company, as Danielle talked about. Follow them on social media. Set up a Google alert. So when you go into that interview, you're able to talk to relevant recent information. It also, make sure you know your interview time, location, interviewers. Go on to LinkedIn and research those interviewers, so that if it is appropriate in the conversation, you're able to talk to them about something that you researched in terms of their experience. It always shows up very well to know that you've done your due diligence beforehand. It just goes to your preparation, your interest in the role. Another thing around being prepared is think about some common interview questions. What's been your biggest challenge that you've overcome in a professional environment? Tell me about a time that you had a leadership role and had to deal with a difficult team member. Some of those more common interview questions, think through how you would answer those. It's always helpful to think about the STAR methodology, where you're thinking about the situation, the task, the action you took, and the result. But on the other hand, it's also helpful to know, as you're preparing, you don't want to memorize. To the third point on the deck, you want to be authentic. So it's helpful to think of what are talking points. You know, if I'm asked about my biggest, biggest weakness, well, how would I answer that? But again, you don't want to go all the way further to the point of memorize, because you do want to come off authentic. At the end of the day, and at an interview, we want to come out of it understanding, do you have the skills and qualifications to perform the job? And are you a fit with the culture and the team? Are you someone that would enjoy working with us, and vice versa? And then last but not least is around follow-up. I would say, gone are the days where you necessarily need to write a nice thank you note and send it via snail mail, but the follow-up is still important. I'd recommend following up within 24 hours of your interview. Email is a good way to follow up. Even I've seen folks send a LinkedIn connection and they put the body of their follow-up in the connection note. I think that's fine too. But that follow-up is not only a way for you to thank your interviewer for their time, but it's also an opportunity for you to sort of resell yourself, to restate any points that you talked about in terms of why you're a fit, to cover anything that maybe you didn't get a chance to talk about. You want to keep that email concise, but also know that it's your chance to resell yourself. The other point on a follow-up, this is maybe a personal pet peeve, but edit it for each individual interviewer. Sending a mass follow-up, the same message repeated to a slate of 5 or 6 interviewers. While it's good that you follow up, it's also really good to take that time to personalize it. Oh, you're on mute.
Well, great conversion to this conversation. I wanted to quickly touch on virtual interviewing. Like I stated at the beginning of this call, Empower is still recruiting, but we are not in the office given everything that is going on in the world. So I think it's really important to touch on, how to handle virtual interviews and how to be successful in those situations. So first and foremost, which I often fail at, is testing technology. So I often recommend setting up a call beforehand on the same exact technology that you're going to use for the interview with a friend, a peer, or a mentor, because you want to make sure, are they using Skype or Microsoft Teams? Is there something you might need to download? Is your internet connection going to be okay for it? How do you look on your computer's background? Is your microphone quality there and your sound quality? I'll say more often than not, people are wearing AirPods or some sort of headphone device, and when they get on to the interview, it doesn't sound right for us on our end. So there's a few minutes where we have to work through what the issue is, and it often ends up being that. So if you just test it beforehand, your mentor or peer can share that feedback with you. It's really important to set the scene and minimize distractions. So your background's crucial. You need to make sure that the lighting's appropriate, there aren't any distracting photos or inappropriate decor, and that you have the appropriate attire as well. So there have been multiple interviews where either the shirt that you're wearing is blending in with the background, or you've tried to do some sort of funky background that has you blending into it as well. So make sure you're wearing the appropriate attire on the top end, but then also I often get people who wear sweatpants or whatever it may be on the bottom end since it's virtual, but then someone's ringing the doorbell or a kid comes in the room, whatever it may be, and then they stand up. So be prepared for any situation and be appropriate in those. When it comes to distractions, I think there are a million that we don't think about that end up happening in the moment. So silence your phones, your TVs. Alexa has been one that's popped up on for me, where she said to the person that they were getting delivered something. Pop-ups on your computer are often one. So if you use GChat or Skype or whatever it might be, that'll pop up during a virtual interview. It throws you off, and then the interviewer can hear the noise as well. Lastly, proper placement of materials. So you want to have your resume or notes that you've taken, questions you've asked nearby, along with a water and whatever else may help you. But you want to make sure wherever you set them, you can keep a good eye on them. And it won't be distracting to the interviewer when you've done that. So for example, you might want to put them up by the camera, whether it's taping them to the wall or whatever it may be. But if you have them down on the desk, you're going to often be looking down like this, and they're just going to be staring at the top of your head. So make sure you put these in the proper spots. Test it out a few times when you're doing that initial test. The other thing I will tell you when it comes out to testing is just make sure you clarify maybe once or twice with the person who's setting up the interview, the time zone. So just because their corporate headquarters is in one spot, never make assumptions about a time zone. I get this a lot of times with Chicago, when I'm interviewing Chicago candidates who just assume that I'm going to be on their time zone, or there's some sort of miscommunication about it. So double check that, just because that kind of starts the interview on the wrong hand if you don't end up getting on in the right time, or the interviewer, the employer gets on in the wrong time. It's hard, you know, when it comes to professional body language. I struggle with this one. I'm a fidgeter, and it's so much more obvious when it is a virtual interview. So try to monitor your body language. If you see that you're going to be fidgeting a lot, maybe put your hands, sit on your hands, or put them on your desk. Keep them somewhere where they won't distract you or make it look a little bit, you know, off on the video. And then, you know, sit up straight, smile, and keep eye contact with the camera. And this is the hard one. I know you kind of have to practice with it a little bit, but the camera doesn't mean where you're seeing the employers. The camera is the actual camera. So oftentimes I have people who set up two screens, or where they've placed the video is off from where the camera is. So for example, if I was looking at my second screen right now, I'd be looking like this, and they don't even notice throughout the interview that that's just them looking this way versus making eye contact. So try to practice looking at the camera, making eye contact throughout, and then also try to not get distracted by the videos on the camera. So if you're one who ends up getting distracted by seeing yourself, maybe put a sticky note over your visual on the service that you're using, or some features even allow you to hide your own video. So that way you don't get in your own head about seeing, you know, yourself on the camera. And then lastly, I think it's really important in these virtual interviews to try to find a way to build rapport. So be prepared to talk about common interests, even if it's initially just talking about these times that we're going through, and, you know, how the interviewer's experience has been with virtual interviews. Find neutral topics that you can to get to know them, whether, you know, they're from Ohio and they're a football fan, or you noticed on their, you know, LinkedIn page that they have an interest in whatever it may be. But some way that you can get to know each other outside of, you know, being one-on-one and having those conversations is crucial.
All right, so yeah, so now we'll move into Q&A. So as we kind of mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you feel more comfortable, you can unmute yourself and ask Danielle and Emmy directly. But as you guys think of some questions, I do have one. In terms of kind of virtual interviewing, what has been kind of the biggest difficulty that you've encountered on your end, as well as those you're interviewing? And what has made, on the flip side, what has been like the most enjoyable experience, or what's made things most easy?
I would say, I think in terms of difficult, so as a recruiter, and, you know, typically we start with phone, I would start with a phone interview, and I'm used to talking to you on the phone, taking notes. And so I just, as, you know, Danielle shared, you know, making sure that you're keeping eye contact, that you're building that rapport, that you're focusing. It's another thing for us as well to adjust to keeping that eye contact, keeping you engaged, getting to know you, while also taking notes and keeping memory, because we do typically, I mean, I may talk to 4 to 6 candidates in any given day. In terms of what's been, I think you said was it enjoyable?
Yeah, most enjoyable experience or easiest.
I mean, it goes to both interviewing, and then also just sort of as we've moved more virtual as a company, I've enjoyed getting to see folks in a different perspective. I have young kids. Sometimes they will come in when I'm on an interview. I say, my coworker interruptions. So I sort of enjoy getting to see a candidate in a different light, or getting to know a little bit more about you, seeing your house, seeing your surroundings. I just think it helps me get to know you a little bit more and establish a relationship.
I agree on that end. And I also think I've had deeper connections because of this. I think, in the in-person interviews, it's pretty easy to start talking about the office at Empower, the culture, some of those easy topics. But because we've been on virtual interviews for the most part, we have to dig a little bit deeper to getting to know the people. So I've asked some specific questions, and I've even advised my hiring managers to ask more specific questions to get to know the person. So how do you keep up with, industry trends? And then sometimes we'll start talking about ad age or events they've gone to, or, what do you do with your free time outside of work? Some of these questions may have been glossed over in the in-person interviews, but we're focusing more on some of these personal questions that have gotten deeper conversations with the candidates. And I also think it's giving me a lot of confidence in these hires, because navigating this situation, you're going to be able to navigate difficult situations in the workplace. So if you're able to pull off, a really strong virtual interview with really great follow-up, I'm really comfortable and confident that you'll be able to, work well with our company and continue to thrive moving forward.
Great. We did have one question that came through the chat as you guys were presenting. Noah asked, is conference attendance something to put on your LinkedIn profile?
See, I can answer that. I personally think I wouldn't put it like in your actual profile, but I think that's a great way to contribute to the conversations that are going on LinkedIn. So, for example, you could post the link to the conference that you're going to with a little blurb about what it is and what you're the most excited to, partake in at the conference, or post it and ask if any of your network connections are going and they're open to getting coffee while they're at it. I think that would be a little bit more appropriate than putting it on your profile, unless you were getting some sort of certification from the conference, then that could go into your profile.
Yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't necessarily put attending a conference on your profile, but to Danielle's point, if you're getting a certification, or if you're a keynote speaker at a conference, that may be something, there's a activity section on LinkedIn that you can put there. But again, just attending, it would be a great way to say, hey, I'm attending this conference as a status update, and connect with other folks that are.
Great. Any other questions from attendees? If not, I have a couple more that I've thought of. So as we navigate this COVID-19 landscape, as someone who is interviewing for a job, in your opinion, what's the level of security or kind of expectations should be for new job placements during this time? Should the applicant expect for them to stay, or is there a fear of kind of getting laid off, and how does that factor into the interview process in general?
That's a good question. I think, one of the things that was mentioned earlier in the presentation is this is much an interview on your end as it is for us. So that is some really good context to bring to the conversation and ask them, have they experienced any layoffs? Have their clients been impacted? Ask those tough questions to make sure you feel comfortable with the answers. But then, on my end, I would also say, we as an organization have not been affected, and we are very comfortable with talking through that in the interview process. So I think that just making sure you're making a move for the right decision and you feel comfortable with it, then I would be confident as well.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, it's a question that I get all the time, right? How's your company faring through COVID? We are part of the Kroger enterprise. So, not only, I'm talking about how our company is faring, but also how we're communicating to employees, what we're doing around return to work. I think it's another opportunity for you to understand not only company stability, but also company culture. How well does the company communicate to their employees? What does flexibility look like? What are those priorities? I think how a company shows up when times are tough is really indicative of how they really are from a leadership and culture perspective.
Awesome. All right. Any questions from anyone else?
I saw one on here that came through that I don't think we answered. How long should I keep my leadership experience on my resume after I graduate college?
I mean, I would say realistically, after that probably second job out of college, maybe 2 to 3 years, it's probably time to drop it off. That experience is relevant to get your first job. Depending on how long you're at your first job, it could be relevant for your second job, but really after that, it's not as much. You're going to continue to build in professional experience, community leadership, etc., that you can then take off that in-school experience.
Agreed.
I will say early in my career, someone had to tell me to take it off. So I hung on to it for a little far too long.
So something I've always been curious about is, let's say you have a side hustle that maybe does pertain to the field or maybe doesn't. Should that be listed in your experience, and is there the possibility for it to be perceived as a negative, like something that would take away from your performance on the job?
It depends what it is. And some companies may have a position around that, right? If you have a business that could be seen as competition for the company or the role, then you may have to make a consideration one day on what you continue and what's most important. At the end, but sometimes it could not compete and it could add to your experience. I know that's not really a great answer because it depends, but if you are applying to a paid search position, for example, and you run a wildly successful blog on the side about knitting, I don't know why that came to my mind, but that necessarily wouldn't be in competition. But the fact that you've run this wild successfully blog, you've monetized it, really shows to your overall experience. So again, that's where I think you kind of got to use your best judgment on if it's relevant, include it. If it's completely not relevant, I would leave it off. But if it is something that you run that you're passionate about, it could be important to bring it up in the interview process to make sure that it wouldn't be seen as competition and it wouldn't be seen as something that you'd have to make a decision on if you continue or take the role with the organization.
Yeah, I think there's a restlessness that I like about people with side hustles. So I think if there's a way it fits on your resume and it isn't competitive to what you're applying to and it is appropriate, then I feel like it can be written. But if you're questioning it, I wouldn't write it and then just try to find a way to bring it up in a positive light in the interview process. But yeah, I think any way that you can kind of contribute to the fact that you are restless, like you're constantly keeping your skills up or you're networking or you're learning, that is attractive to employers.
One question I had is, how do you get a sense if you're interviewing for a job of the company culture if you have to start that job virtually?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it you can do online, which we're really lucky about right now. There's so many resources with, companies, whether it's their Instagram, their Facebook, or even, Glassdoor that you have to take with a grain of salt sometimes. But these are all ways that you can kind of learn what's important to them, what their core values are, and how they're portrayed on a regular basis. But this is even a more important step to that networking piece and why networking is so important. If you are able to reach out to someone in that company and hear firsthand what they think of the culture, that's going to help you feel so much more confident in the position.
Yeah, I agree. I think networking, and also if you get to the end of an interview process or you're in an interview process and you really want to talk to who would be your team or a peer member or two, I don't mind if someone asks me, hey, could I talk to a coworker or whatever it is, just to get a greater sense of the organization.
Sure.
That's certainly within your right to do so. You know, back to the point that it's as much an interview for you as it is for the company. So you need to feel confident in the information that you've gathered, the conversations that you've had, that you're making the choice that's right for you in your career. So don't ever be shy to ask to have additional conversations if that'll help you make your decision and gather that info.
Thanks.
Just a quick plug. As you guys know, we are the American Marketing Association. We offer a ton of networking opportunities. That includes just having coffee, well, now virtually, with people and just connecting to whether you're looking to help people who are looking or contemplating any sort of job transition. We as a community are definitely here for you guys. If you've been in the marketing field here in Cincinnati for any amount of time, you know it's a very small world. So those connections definitely go far. So definitely leverage opportunities like this and other things that companies and organizations put on for sure. So I'll ask one more question unless anyone else has anything. What are your expectations, or do you guys have any theories about what work culture within the marketing industry will look like post-COVID-19?
I think that companies through this, and I know at least I can speak to ours specifically, we've gotten really good at collaborating virtually. So I think, you know, we'll see more and more virtual. You've heard Twitter, what they've gone remote forever and ever. And so I think we'll see more companies now. This has sort of forced us in a way to get really comfortable being remote and virtual. So we'll see that. But I think too, really being purposeful about your brand, whether that's your employment brand, your brand as a company, your personal brand as a candidate, and finding ways to let that show through and connect with people in an authentic way will continue to be important no matter how you do it, what platform, in person, etc.
I agree. And one of our core values at Empower is make it personal. And I feel like this entire situation has made everything so personal, where I've even gotten closer with coworkers through these connections, and new hires have even said they've had, you know, a really strong, great onboarding process just because there's so much more one-on-one time. There aren't the office distractions. So I think ultimately, you know, this has just built connections within the organization where I'm kind of anticipating like less of, you know, turnover across organizations, depending on how their company handled COVID, and just, you know, more collaboration, but like Emmy said, more thoughtful collaboration.
Awesome. I just want to be told that I can work from London until I want to come back home.
I'll pass along that message for you.
I appreciate it. Awesome. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Emmy, for taking out the time in the middle of the week to kind of share some insider tips. For everyone here, if this was helpful for you guys, feel free to share your feedback with the AMA. And if you would like to learn anything more, feel free to share those topics of conversation. Maybe we could do like a, you know, first to 30 days on the job and what that looks like as you kind of land that new job coming out of all this stuff. So yeah, stay tuned. Thanks you guys for joining. We appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Thanks.